Much for speaking to me. Storming the Palace was extremely educational, not just of educating us of what happened in the past, but watching this film, I saw what is happening currently today and how we have this cyclical nature of discrimination.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, can you talk about the importance? Yes, the story itself is important, but why it's important right now?
Sure. Storming Caesar's Palace is a historical documentary, but it couldn't be more relevant today. We're still facing so many of the same issues. There are 37 million people who are living in poverty today. And if we include folks that are on the verge, I think it goes up to 45 million. We have 13 million kids living in poverty. There are hungry people. Affordable housing is a problem. The economic inequality right now is actually worse than it was back in the 60s and 70s when this film takes place. So the things that Miss Ruby Duncan and the other mothers of the National Welfare Rights Organization were fighting for is absolutely things that we're still fighting for today. And what I think is so exciting about them is that they were fighting for, guaranteed income. They were fighting for dignity, for economic justice, and democratic participation, all things that, again, we're fighting for today. And I think what was so visionary was that they were fighting for a guaranteed income. This is something that we still don't have. We don't have an income floor in this country. And clearly we really need one. And so, to me, it's just so, forward thinking and courageous of them to have been putting that out there, more than 50 years ago.
Ruby Duncan and also this documentary really helps to demyst the lot of myths that they help to I am so sorry if I'm messing this word up, but they help to kind of get rid of a lot of myths that has already been established, especially when it came to the welfare queen or women don't like to work. So can you kind of talk about going through in that research and seeing what the kind of the marketing against people who needed public assistance to really, talk to those people to say, these are just your average everyday people?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest myths that we have in this country is that poor people don't want to work, and that they're for some reason undeserving of government support. I mean, we should be having a safety net that supports our people, so that if anyone falls on bad times, there's a safety net for them. I think there's something like half of America, people, if they have an unexpected incident happen, like an accident, a divorce, a medical emergency, they would be basically in poverty. So I think one of the misconceptions is that, I don't need welfare. I'm not going to need unemployment. I don't need these things. But actually, we all very well might. And I think COVID really pulled back the curtain on that. I mean, the stimulus checks, that was essentially welfare, right? Anytime there's a tax break, anytime there's a farm subsidy, Elon Musk and all sorts of folks who aren't paying taxes, like Jeff Bezos, they're basically, getting welfare. We see banks getting bailed out, right? That's all welfare. American people are paying for corporate things. So instead of having that money go up, we should have it stay down where the folks are, where real people are, right? We're hardworking people. And I think that politicians often trot out that sort of welfare mom trope, the totally racist and totally wrong stereotype about who is on welfare. Over the years, 3/4 of the people who are on welfare are white. So it's not even women of color and Black women who are receiving welfare in the highest numbers. And we see in the film that Ruby Duncan and the other women are actually really, really hardworking, working harder than, most people are, right? They're not only taking care of all of their children, but they're fighting for their community, and they're banding together, organizing, lobbying ultimately for food stamps, which now feeds like 38 million people. So, and becoming, participating in the democratic process, realizing that I am the expert, we are the experts on what we need the most, not the people who don't know how much diapers cost, how much milk costs, how much eggs cost, the people who are stretching their monthly budget as far as it can go to pay rent and the electric bill and everything else. And so I think the sooner that we realize that we have the power and that we know our experience, the sooner we will be able to try to make change.
How did Ruby Duncan come into your radar?
It's a good question. I have been a couple different ways. I have been really interested in studying, and this sounds sort of separate and very, academic, but the intersectionality that women of color, and particularly Black women, face throughout history. So I became totally obsessed with Ida B. Wells when I was in college. And I found it frustrating that women of color, because whenever they're trying to do anything, are not only facing sort of discrimination in civil rights, because it's sort of like, well, the men will, take care of that and run that, even though women are always the backbone of these movements, right? But then also women of color excluded from sort of white feminist movements as well. And so really having to confront both racism and sexism at the same time. So, and I'm also born in Colombia, in Bogota, and I am an adoptee. So I was born to this is the story anyway, that I was born to a 16-year-old girl who couldn't keep me for one reason or another. And so I really have always wanted to, with the privilege that I have, because I was lucky enough to be adopted by a family of means in the US, that I feel like a responsibility and a duty to be able to really uplift the stories of women, of mothers, particularly of color, who are fighting for their children, fighting for their families, and that are really fighting these systemic barriers in order to do that.
What is really interesting is that, yes, you focus on the welfare system, but it also connects to other systems as well. You had the banning of abortion. So therefore, it kept women having kids, and then with more kids, less money. Can you talk about that inclusion? I felt it was really important because we're seeing this today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of those sort of stereotypical tropes is that, women are having all these kids on welfare and that they get so much money for doing that. And, you get like $25 a month a kid or something. It's like, this doesn't actually barely feed anybody. And one of the reasons that we see in the film that Ruby Duncan and the other mothers who are sort of profiled end up having as many children as they do is because they don't have access to, birth control and to have their own reproductive choice. And so we're seeing that again now. I mean, back in the 70s, Roe v. Wade was passed just after the sort of the film takes place. And now we're seeing that rolled back again, and it's really kind of horrifying. And I think one of the things to remember is that if the government are going to take away our right to choose when we want to have our family, they need to, at minimum, give us enough of a safety net to be able to take care of them. What is the point of having children who then, the government may feel is some sort of burden on them that, they're going to have to pay for things? So then give us the right to choose. It just seems, so crazy and kind of backward. And I think, I am very cognizant of the history of sort of birth control with women of color, particularly Black women, where there were efforts to, sterilize women and there still happens. So women in prisons in California, there was that whole thing not that long ago that we saw happening. So, it's the choice of when to do it. It's not to say, well, you should have an abortion or you should do one way or the other. It's whatever is right for you and for your family to be able to decide.
What is really interesting, and I wanted to know from you, is we've seen these same arguments literally made from the past into today. We had, for example, in Minnesota, kind of the governor saying, well, hungry people don't exist because I've never known anyone who's hungry. And then we switched to, remember we had, then you, in your documentary, there was Mike Callahan,
Yeah.
who basically stated, I've never met any poor people. What are you talking about? So was that intentional, or did that just happen by circumstance, by that you would show that actual reflection of the times and how that arguments are still being made today?
Oh, it was totally intentional. For me, this is a historical film, but it couldn't be more relevant today. And I think that as a filmmaker who likes to tell historical stories, the reason I like to do that is because we can see what's happening today sort of through a historical lens. I think it allows us to kind of take a step back and be like, whoa, that's crazy. But if you hear someone say it today, you're like, well, I don't know that I support that person or I don't support that person, but it's harder because it's so close. But by looking at the past, I think, and this is not very far away past either, you know, this is our lifetime. Ruby is 90 years old now. So it's like our grandmas, right, who are going through and doing all of these fights for us. Yeah, I think it just by looking at the past, we can really see where we are now. And it also shows us the choices that we can make now to affect the future. Like we
When
could again choose things like, sorry to interrupt, but like we could really push for the child tax credit. We could be fighting for a guaranteed income, things that they were trying for 50 years ago, we could be trying again now.
right, through doing this research and talking to the many people that you've been able to, what were the important elements that created such a compelling documentary that you felt was necessary?
Um, I mean, I just thought this film was such an
Right.
important story that it just had to be told. It was shocking to me that I didn't know the story. I came to the story as well. I don't remember if I said this, but I read a book. You know, there was a book that was published in 2005 called Storming Caesar's Palace, how Black mothers fought their own war on poverty. And it's actually being re-released in a month or so now to kind of coincide with the book. So that's exciting. Um, with I think a new forward or a new kind of introduction or conclusion. But yeah, I mean, I was just sort of shocked that this whole story was kind of a footnote of history. And, you know, as we see Stacey Abrams, like incredible, you know, Black women leaders today, it's like, right, they're all standing on the shoulders of people before them. And I think it's important to realize this isn't sort of a flash in the pan. There's a history, there's a legacy of like Black women leaders who have been on the ground doing the work for generations, basically for all time, obviously. But, you know, in terms of the film, you know, since the 60s and 70s. I don't know if I answered your question or if
Yes,
I just
yes,
went
yes,
off
you
on
did.
some tangent.
No,
But
no,
yeah, it just, you know, it just feels like a story that people don't know and they should. And it's,
right,
you know, a great opportunity to spotlight the visionary work of low-income mothers who are often, you know, ridiculed and stigmatized and, you know, treated really badly by other people. And so it's important that we, I think, reframe that narrative that we have and, yeah, just really reveal who are the important leaders in this country.
right. You did such a great job at showing the history of Nevada in terms of this movement. Have you heard back from the residents of today so they know what the past has gotten them into the future?
Yes, we just had a fabulous screening on the West Side at the West Side Library in Las Vegas the other day, and it was so great. It was such an honor for me to be able to bring the film home so that folks from the community could come out and see it. Um, you know, we show in the film a lot of sort of Las Vegas and particularly highlighting the West Side. So you sort of see Jackson Street, which during segregation was the place where Black folks could, you know, go out on the town. That's where you could gamble. That's where you could go dancing, and amazing performers like, you know, Sammy Davis Jr. and Lena Horne and Nat King Cole, and people would come there. So it was really like a hop and spot. But today, it's not so much. Like it is an area that has been, you know, riddled, unfortunately, with so many the blights that affect so many unfortunately urban centers. Like there's just not as much happening on that particular street as there used to be. And so I think there's something really fun and exciting and inspiring about sharing that history about the neighborhood. And I think another thing that people may or may not have really realized is that the west side of Las Vegas, like so many other cities like Watts and Newark, and had uprisings in the 60s. Theirs was in October of 69 as a result of police brutality. And so I think there are many ways in which Las Vegas is like any other city, but in other ways, because of all of the lights and the shows and the strip, it seems like some other place. And I think for me, it was an incredible location for this film to sort of take place, because you can see this is a city where tourists literally come to throw away money. And yet the people who live there and work there don't have enough of a safety net to be able to feed their families. So just, it was so stark, to be able to see that comparison just in one place. And so it was just amazing to come back to the community and be able to share it. And everyone was so excited. We had family members, descendants of Mary Wesley and Alversa Beals and many of the other moms, and Ruby Duncan's family, and it was nice too. We had officials come out as well to kind of be supportive as well. And they didn't speak. This was a community event, so I was like, it was important for me that we be centered in the community, and they be the people who speak, and the politicians can listen. But it was great. We had a senator and various folks there, so it was a great time.
Thank you for kind of including the fact that the hotel, that not just the hotels, but the casinos were literally giving food away to people who spent money there, while the people, their own citizens, were starving, the rickets with the babies. So it is an interesting way how you show the disproportion of poverty and wealth. What I wanted to know is, this is something that happened, yes, and it's still continuing to happen, but change can come. The problem is that we have to make sure that it's sustainable. What do you feel? You've spoken to Ruby before, of what we can do as just like her, regular people, to make sure that it's sustainable, that ourselves and future generations can live basically with food and housing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the model that Ruby Duncan and the other women of the National Welfare Rights Organization sort of laid out for us is that organizing is the first step, right? Coming together actually is really the very first step. Coming together, kind of having consciousness raising, realizing like, oh, if you're having this problem, I'm having this problem, our neighbors are having this problem, then this is actually a systemic problem. This isn't our fault. This isn't on us, right? This is something that has been set up already for us to have to deal with. And if we come together, we can fight against it. I think that their use of what's the word I'm trying, sorry. Their use of kind of going onto the strip and using, nonviolent, but, real sort of, sorry, I don't know why I'm like not thinking of the word, like basically when you go like disruptive power, right? Like they're going there, and if they're stopping business as usual, that is then opening the eyes of the people, the corporations, the politicians, the people who are making all the money, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, the people who would normally be quietly going about their business are now unhappy. It made them someone that they had to deal with. And I think the next step after protesting is starting to lobby. Ruby is the first to say that when she started this process, she didn't know how to run a meeting. She didn't know anything about politics. She didn't even know that the words welfare and rights could be in the same sentence. But her experience in the Culinary Workers Union taught her that there is power when people come together, and then bringing that with her into her community, to the West Side, to Marble Manor Housing Project, to all the different places she was at, really showed that once people get together in a mass, you can make a difference. And for me, you know, and I should say she also learned how to lobby. We mentioned this before. She goes to Carson City, and the other women do as well. And so, you know, they're understanding kind of the mechanisms of political power. You can, you know, take in their example the supermarket lobby kind of against a conservative legislature, and then suddenly you have food stamps. I mean, I think if we always kind of remember that, unfortunately, money is what you know, politicians and powerful people seem to be interested in. If we can show the economic importance of actually, you know, having housing and food for everyone, then maybe they will start to be more on board and not see it as a handout, but see it as, you know, a useful way of keeping our country as productive as possible. So I think for me, the takeaway of the film is that anyone can do anything. You know, Ruby was, you know, the child of sharecroppers. She was picking cotton in Louisiana, and yet ended up in the halls of power working for Jimmy Carter's White House.
Right.
You know, I think if we remember, if there's any injustice that we feel, anything that feels wrong in our community, if we just come together, we can make that change. But we have to be persistent. We have to be diligent. We have to not give up, and, you know, put the phone down, put social media away unless you can use it in
Right.
order to make larger numbers. I mean, the fact that these women were doing all of this work before the internet, before cell phones, is amazing to me. This was like boots on the ground, like really like handing out, you know, literature, going door knocking, door to door. And they were able to make a really big difference, particularly with Operation Life. I mean, you ask about sustainable, you know, there's sort of the state level kind of local work that people can do. And Operation Life was sustainable for a long time. They had this great model where they were getting funding, federal funding, to be able to run anti-poverty programs in their own community. And because they knew what they needed, it was really successful. Like they were, you know, they could go out into the community and get folks in their car and bring them down to the clinic when, you know, moms might not be bringing their kids because they're just so busy with work or doing other things. You know, I think it's a perfect example of the way in which we can kind of help ourselves as well, and make that work for us, right? You don't have to have somebody come in to the community running some program that doesn't actually work. It doesn't help. Like, again,
Right.
we're the experts, and we know, like Ruby always says, we can do it and do it better. So
Right.
I just carry that mantra.
Thank you so much for speaking to me. Again, beautiful documentary. Much is needed and very educational and inspiring as well. So thank you so much for that.
Of course. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk more about the film. And yeah, it was a long 15-year journey, but I'm so glad that it's finally out into the world, where you can share it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.